All right, welcome back to episode number 1 of season 3 of the Conversion Tracking Playbook podcast. Today we've got a lot of hot takes. We just had Google Marketing Live. We just had Shopify Editions came out yesterday as well. Today's recording is all around the changes in the SEO landscape and how LLMs are playing into that. We'll get into GA4, structured data, how to think about your storefront in the future. And I'm here with an expert that I respect his opinion. If you aren't following, Sam Wright, founder and CEO of Blink SEO and Macaroni Software Suite. Go make sure you follow him on LinkedIn because I don't think he shares anything else just besides learnings and tidbits all around the world of SEO and analytics. So Sam, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Brad. That's a very nice introduction. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so I'm going to put you right on the spot to get going, Sam. Shopify Editions, we were just talking before I clicked recording. You've been digging into all the changes. There were just a ton of them. What is your number one change or improvement that Shopify rolled out that you feel like is going to impact the world of, I don't want to call it SEO or whatever the new buzzwords are for SEO within LLMs, but yeah, what's the biggest change that you think every brand or business should be aware of?
Well, I think there's 3 key ones, if that's not too many
right,
to run
3.
through now. 3.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll keep them super quick, I promise. So first of all, the updates to Shopify Markets, I think, are going to have quite a big impact. We've known merchants for some time requesting more flexibility in how they can manage the business entities.
Yep.
So I think I think the kind of one of the outcomes there is businesses can now use multiple entities, which gives a lot more flexibility in how markets can be set up.
Yep.
So from an international SEO perspective, that can have quite a big outcome. The next one is one where the details are pretty scarce still. The Shopify catalog announcement. We haven't seen any. We haven't been able to get access to it with any of the stores that we're working on at the moment. It looks like it's still on the wait list. But this is the thing where your product data is basically fed in directly into ChatGPT, Perplexity, all of that stuff. This is edging towards that world where your product feed becomes the source of, where your product data becomes so important for SEO. So that's a really interesting change that I think is going to have a big one. And then finally, we've got the Shopify knowledge base announcement, which is really, really interesting. So Shopify have released an app now, which allows you to to create FAQ content that's then again fed directly into ChatGPT and other kind of AI models.
Right.
This is really, really interesting for us because I think it's a really clear signal in the direction that things are going with content. These AI systems like ChatGPT, they need to be fed data. And this kind of standardized FAQ structure makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I think the thing that's been really, one of the things that stood out straight away is that it is just a feed at the moment. It does not display on the storefront. Like that opens up a whole bunch of interesting questions.
So it's kind of like if you think about a Google Shopping feed. So it's like a Google Shopping feed, except it's a quote unquote FAQ knowledge base feed that you'd create, and then Shopify would automatically connect it to or allow LLMs to pull that content.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. I think having it distinct from a feed is a really interesting choice. Like for us, we see the value in, like if you've got valuable content there, we really want to be displaying it on the site. If it's going to help the user journey and things like that. So internally we're working on some ways to kind of like bring those things together. But it kind of in this kind of world of where AI is heading, we've long had this idea that, we've been working to this idea that brands need to have their data in a kind of like their brand data in a portable format. Yeah. And I think this is a really good indication of that. Because when
that would be one action item. Sorry to cut you off there, but just to make sure. So an action item that someone could take listening to this would be, if you don't have even an internal FAQ, like a brand guide, an internal FAQ guide, it could be, how do you use the product? How do you compare to, alternatives, et cetera? Is that your recommendation right now that you are making with your clients today?
Yeah. Like broadly speaking, you know, document everything at the moment. Like we don't know exactly what format these data feeds are going to take. But if you've got all of that data ready to go, you're going to be in a good position to move quite quickly.
Yeah.
So, you know, like we've got our own internal Notion docs and things like
Yeah.
that. And yeah, it makes sense for us just to be reviewing those, formatting them correctly, and then pushing those into that kind of content. You know,
What about pulling FAQs from reviews? So anybody that has reviews and FAQs on site, is that a source of data that you would recommend starting to pull from?
yeah, absolutely. I think for us here, like a lot of this comes down to how can you bring in data that no one else has? How can you differentiate yourself when you're in that kind of feed environment?
Right.
So that the more you can pull in, and like loads of people have good data about material, size, you know, color, but not many people have great data about use cases and all of that kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
softer
Yeah.
stuff that sits around the decision-making process.
Yeah.
You know, like, is this piece of garden furniture good for kids because it's got a rubber edge? You know, like,
Right.
and I think in this world of personalized shopping where we're going, that kind of attribute data is going to be really, really valuable, but it needs to be surfaced from
Yeah.
somewhere. Um,
That's such a good point, because when you are in your business, you're so focused on just, what's the brick that you got
yeah,
to lay today, and sometimes you miss those edges of what are people looking for. So the solutions or the use cases, I think, is a great recommendation. And that's how, so right now you'd say start adding that, or thinking about how to create that knowledge base that are purely use cases versus what are the nuts and bolts of the specs of the product and the materials of the product.
yeah, exactly. I mean, everybody has the use case, like the specs for their products,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
especially if you're selling commodity products. You know, you can obviously, if you're a D2C brand with a unique offering, and you can go a
Yeah.
bit deeper into this stuff.
Yeah.
But, you know, we're in a world where we're going to be, you know, it's really easy to interrogate ChatGPT or something similar and say, find me the best reviewed product at the
Yeah.
lowest
Yeah.
price. You know,
Yeah.
so how can you stand out in that
Yeah.
environment?
Yeah.
And that comes from all of that kind of softer data.
Yeah. Well, Shopify Markets, I think it'll be episode number 3 or 4. That'll be all about Shopify Markets with a couple of experts. I think you might know a few of the folks coming on, so I'm excited for that one. So I'll leave that one to the side. What about the Google Marketing Live hot takes? I have one that probably not the one people would expect me to pull out or to say is potentially the biggest one. But what's your hot take on Google Marketing Live?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot to take in. I think the kind of agent shopping function, you know, where you can allow
Yeah.
Google to go out and shop for you is one of the big ones. And again, this all comes back to so much the stuff that, you know, that we're focused on. Um, the better the data that you have, the more opportunity you've got around that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, the basic mechanics of price and material and blah 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 are going to make a difference. But you know, if we're developing a world where we have AI shoppers acting on our behalf,
Yeah.
they still need to be fed data. You know, and the people that will win will feed them the richest and most, you know, coherent data.
Yeah. 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 So we could have a whole episode talking about the agentic shopping and how far away, like, is there enough trust where people will just give their wallet over to Google and let people complete the purchase? I'm probably not there yet, but surfacing the different ideas and recommendations for sure. So I don't have to Google
Yeah,
search and, use ChatGPT to help find different product types. So mine, I just wrote down a few the quick bullet points. I just put these on LinkedIn as well. But if you didn't watch Google Marketing Live, and I think a lot of the buzz so far is around the agent shopping and checkout within Google search, et cetera. But so they have cross-channel attribution where they're pulling in campaign data from Pinterest, Reddit, Snapchat, but not Meta. So that's like the biggest but. So I just think that's, until they pull in Meta, you won't have the masses use it, because that's where 80% of prospecting budget is still today. And TikTok, obviously, no TikTok data either. So that was one. with that, you get, I think view through conversions will come through as well. But I think just taking a step back, it's good. That was always a big knock that I would hear. I'm sure you've heard as well with any attribution reporting in Google or GA4 or Universal Analytics. The people would say, well, they're going to over-report Google. That's the only campaign data that they have. So I don't really trust it. I'm not even going to look at it. So the more that Google moves down this, trying to be a little bit more objective, I think is important, because that leads into another rollout that I'm curious to see how adoption happens, which is the measurement tooling, and they have a new open source MMM solution called Meridian. That one, again, I think it's a TBD. I don't claim to be an expert in MMM or MMA or MTA or any of those acronyms, but I just want to watch and see how that rolls out and how people might take advantage of the incrementality testing in Google as well. So that's not my initial hot take. Ironically, I think the one, if they can nail it, is the benchmarking. So there was somewhat of a footnote, but they did mention they will be rolling out benchmarking. If they can nail benchmarking, we are a comparison culture. If you go on Instagram or LinkedIn, you're comparing yourself to others. And that's always been something that our customers have asked of Elevar. How do we compare? Like, what are you seeing today or Black Friday? Like, what's this brand doing, or what's this industry niche, et cetera? So if they can truly nail benchmarking, I think that can make GA4 stickier than what I would say generally today. You hear this all the time. This is one of the topics is the GA4 attribution mess. Most just don't trust GA4. It's too convoluted, complicated. So they rely on platform reporting. But benchmarking could be that way to pull people back in and increase their DAUs, so daily active users, or MAUs, monthly active users, because we just want to compare and see how we're doing. So who knows what it looks like? Are they going to compare add to cart rates? Are you going to be able to compare categories or your dollar value, like AOV? So you're not comparing yourself to someone who's 10x AOV. But that's my initial hot take that I hope really comes to fruition.
I find the benchmarking subject so interesting. And I've seen so many people try and do it and get it wrong because they don't really model in they model in categories, but not type of business.
Right.
Right. There's a world of difference between a subscription business, D2C, with a handful of SKUs.
Yeah.
You might see that kind, like if we're talking conversion rates, they might be 8%. And it's not necessarily the product category, it's the business, it's the type where you get that consistency. So if they model that in, might maybe be slightly surprised, but I think that's where I would expect to see some better data.
They build for the masses, so it's hard. Even we're in e-commerce. Even if you think all e-commerce is still a niche. It's still like when we get into our world, at least in the Elevar side, and very, very heavily indexed in Shopify. Even though Shopify is massive, but it's still a niche within a niche of just overall Google users. Let's transition into our next topic, which is just search is changing fast. You're the expert here. What's going on with search, and maybe specifically organic?
Yeah, it's been a journey, that's for sure. So I think we've come a long way from that world that we used to live in, where it's just 10 blue links in the search results. We've seen the SERPs get more and more congested, and that was before AI results came along. We've seen all of these kind of expanded ad functions. We've got shopping, organic shopping, like different types of search ads, and all of that tends to push a lot of the organic listings further down the page. I think what we have seen with that, though, is this kind of hockey stick effect, where we see people, look for a shopping result, they'll scroll down, look at all of the other results on the page, then, supported by the organic listing, may go back and buy from shopping. But this has kind of led to there's an underreporting in organic revenue because of a lot of this kind of behavioral changes. And that's before we get onto the terrible problems with tracking that you will know all about. And when tracking is bad, organic is one of the channels that loses out most of all. especially when you.
Just
Sorry.
to clarify that point, I thought was really interesting you made. So the hockey stick is where someone, let's say there's it's Nike in the Shopify list,
Yep.
and someone's whatever their search term is, so black out running shoes, and you're saying they're scrolling down, they'll see the organic listing from Nike, but they ultimately will scroll back up and click on one of the shopping or the paid links for Nike. So
Yep.
you're saying organic is kind of like the view through impression. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, and that's a good way of phrasing it, and it's one that's quite ironic, really, considering how critical I am of view through impressions on other platforms. But I mean, there's that kind of sense that when we look at these channels in isolation, our customers are across all channels and across all touch points. So
right.
It's being visible across all of them is super important. But from our perspective, that we do see organic revenue really, really strong in the e-commerce space still.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we've seen 20% of visibility go down from AI results, it's not translated into revenue because people still buy, through through traditional search in many ways. But we've kind of been battling that kind of complexity in the SERP with a lot of the trust issues that you've mentioned with GA4. The rollout has been, the reception's been pretty mixed, as I'm sure you can agree. Yeah. And lots of people have abandoned it or don't trust the data. And again, that's the only really way of reporting on organic performance. So if you swipe that kind of trust out, then it makes it all a bit trickier.
So just to maybe tie that together. So at a very basic level, if you're seeing a 20% drop in revenue attributed to organic,
revenue, sorry. Visible impressions, clicks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say, is the drop in what you're seeing organic are you seeing more in paid? So if it was 20% down in organic, are you seeing a 20% bump in revenue to paid because of that behavior that we just talked about?
Well, I think most of the drop we've seen is from top of the funnel blog content, just being scythed off by AI results, and that stuff never made any money anyway. So it's not really been that big a deal. Obviously if we're in the publishing space or something else, it would be, much more concerning. I think there's a lot of industries that are having to, are facing kind of much more existential challenges than e-commerce.
Right.
Just because of that kind of buying journey. But yeah, I think we're kind of, regardless of all this, we are seeing some pretty big shifts in how people purchase online at the moment.
So what's an action? If we were just to give folks one or two action items they could take just from this little pocket of discussion, what can they do?
I mean, tracking is one of the big ones. For us, 9 out of 10 stores that we look at have pretty big structural problems or foundational problems with tracking that mean that organic is being underreported.
Right.
And server side and everything is one solution to that.
Right.
So, I mean, we've seen plenty of instances where organic revenue doubles when you fix checkout extensibility, cookie consent, all of that stuff.
Right.
But that's obviously, that's not moving. That's not creating new revenue.
Right.
So other than that, I mean, a lot of the kind of foundational stuff really is the same. We talk a lot about taxonomy, attributes like solid site structure. All of this kind of thing is still, it still works and it still will work in the new direction that everything's headed as well.
So it's more important today, going back to knowledge-based convo, it's more important today to really have your site structure, your Google shopping feed, just to make it an easy, synonymous example. Yeah. Make sure that's really dialed in, because it's not just for Google shopping anymore. It could be used for many different cases that you don't really necessarily know exactly how it's being used.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. I mean, for us, We see increasingly Shopify being like your feed. That
Right.
is your,
Right.
and so it's this kind of idea of like decentralization of everything, and your
Right.
brand almost disappearing and becoming a stream of data. So
Right.
that the better optimized your products are, in terms of attributes and schema and all of that kind of thing, the better your taxonomy and categorization, the clearer everything it is, gives you that kind of opportunity going forward.
What about putting some of the use cases in the product name? I mean, you see this on Amazon. If you just scroll through Amazon listings, you're going to see the product names are
Uh,
just stuffed with use cases, and I'm guilty of relying on those too, because I don't want to go
uh,
through the sea of just junk on the Amazon product page to determine the use cases. So definitely, I know it's gotten me in the past. What are your thoughts on that
I mean, I
strategy?
started out in e-commerce like 20 odd years ago on eBay, selling stuff on eBay. And that was the way you would optimize a product. You would put every category that it lived in its
Right.
title. And you'd end up with this kind of like crazy, like long title. And, that happens on Amazon. I think the thing is though, like the LLMs can pull, like, that's because they're just looking at the title is overly weighted in
Yeah. Yeah.
terms of like the source of data. So and this is the thing about using your website as the source, you've got all of these different places to store that data, whether it's the schema, this new knowledge based stuff that's come along. So there's loads more points that you can make richer, where you don't need to like spam the title.
Right.
I mean, that
Right.
said, we don't know if title spamming is going to
Right.
work,
Okay, so
which it might
don't
do.
spam the titles.
No, no,
That's
no. What I'd say for anybody wanting to get ahead with all of this stuff, the biggest impact thing you can probably be doing is thinking about the structure of your data, really, because if it's well modeled, no matter what happens in the future, you can map column A to column B,
right.
but that relies on you having your attribute data. If you sell
Right.
sofas, it's not just color, material, it's all of the softer stuff that goes along with it, all that feedback from your customers. Have you got it in a format that you could spin out into a feed?
Right.
And we all know that's hard work. Like
Right.
operationally, that can be a challenge because you need to bring together your merchandising team, your product team, marketing. Where does that sit as a business function?
Right.
But those are the kind of decisions I would be, pushing people to make now.
So that's a good transition into talking about the LLMs as a shopping interface. That was part of that, I think, number 2 of your takeaway from Shopify Editions, and it's been one of those. I don't want to call it a meme, but it's felt like a meme on LinkedIn, at least, where people have, including myself, have talked about the impact of Shopify interface within ChatGPT, where you're essentially on a hosted checkout or hosted Shopify
Yeah.
checkout. Do you have any quantifiable data on what you've seen so far in quote unquote search moving from Google to ChatGPT or Perplexity or any of these others?
I mean, at the moment, it's pretty minimal. Most stores, it's in terms of like conversions, it's probably on a par with Yandex or Yahoo.
Right.
And obviously, we don't have for the Yandex, we don't really work with Russian brands, so
Right. Right.
it's small, but it's growing. And the fact that it is transacting even at this kind of small level is a proof of concept, really, at
Mm-hmm.
this stage. We expect that it's not going to be a tap that is immediately turned on and starts gushing, but if we were to have this conversation in 6 months, 12 months, that number is going to be significantly higher.
Right. Yeah. 'Cause I thought about even just personal use on Instagram shopping. It, I don't want to say Instagram is discovery, but I will say Instagram in the last year or two, and I guess Meta, they have nailed their personalization, even with getting, if we go back 4+ years ago to the whole iOS 14.5 rollout, that was just a massive impact to advertisers. But now they have it dialed in. So when you're doom scrolling, so to speak, the recommendations that you get, they are on point. So I've tried to think ahead to the LLM. If Google didn't exist today, and people are only using a ChatGPT like interface, is that another quote unquote doom scroll where it has so much contextual information on you because I'm taking a picture of a plant, like why is it droopy? Is it too much water, not enough water, like whatever it might be. And so will we see more of that embedded ad experience in LLMs? So what are your thoughts, and how are you guiding your customers in this early stage of LLMs becoming a shoppable interface, and how it relates to whether it's structured data or any other recommendations that you have?
So I think, whenever there's a new discovery platform that's launched, we always have this nice golden period where, like the focus is on providing a good experience. It's only when we get a bit deeper in that the monetization ramps up. And so I'm, the optimist in me is hoping for that nice golden period that gives us a transition to lean into it. But really, yeah, like in terms of how we're guiding our clients, so much of it is just related to what we're doing already. Again, like going back to like the solid attribute data, taxonomy, making sure everything's clean, well organized.
That's by categories. Is that what you mean by that? So taxonomy, you're thinking about collections, sub-collections, product type, tags that you apply to a product. Anything else?
Exactly. And I think, but then when we get into Shopify, there's all the complexity about Shopify structure there. Like we can't. There is no parent-child structure on Shopify, so you have to develop that. You can build it through linking. We display subcategory, like custom code the collections to show subcategories, build that relationship with schema, internal linking and stuff like that. But yeah, like that's essentially what we're talking about when it comes to taxonomy.
And do you feel like that's going to have how does that translate into the shoppable interface or within LLMs? Let's take the Vioris of the world, Nikes, et cetera, that you have like, this is a Viore shirt. It comes in, I don't know, 8 different colors and 4 or 5 different sizes. So whether it's that or shoes or dresses, whatever it might be, how do you look at handling that variant structure?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, increasingly, we're kind of looking at product pages almost like a prompt. Like they're the source of data, but then it becomes like there's a balance there because there's almost an infinite amount of data that you can surface on a product page. So then it becomes like, is that displayed in HTML? Visible code. Do you break out some of the less essential stuff into schema? And that's kind of stuff that we're experimenting with at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe as we land this plane in the next 5 or so minutes, I don't want to say that the storefront is dead because I don't believe it is. There's so much shopping that still happens in the storefront. So maybe it's just some short-term optimization tips that you have. What can brands do today that's going to help them in the next 3 months and help with conversion optimization on site? It could be based on taxonomy changes or just in general, just tips that you have based on some wins that your customers have seen.
Yeah, absolutely. So historically, we've always seen that about 60% of organic revenue and Google Ads revenue specifically for kind of new customers arrives on a collection page. We know that that's the kind of best point of entry for that search journey. A lot of Shopify stores don't optimize their collections properly. They don't expand them out. And being more granular with them, like if you sell, garden sheds, breaking it into subcategories, metal, wooden, even types of wood. If you've got them all, that's usually the quickest way that you can grow. And I think this does all tie in with this kind of broader direction as well. When you're thinking about things in terms of that kind of taxonomy structure, there's a kind of all kinds of things you can do with it. So that would be one. I would be jumping on the knowledge base stuff as well. It takes seconds to install it. Feeding in your FAQ data there.
Yeah.
And again, like we view that as being content that should be on the site as well. So I think that they're probably the two, absolute quickest wins that people should be working on.
Anything else?
I mean, like Tracking, yes.
Okay.
So you can actually measure that this stuff is working.
Yeah.
Is important.
What about
But
brand? This is a little bit of maybe a personal anecdote, but I find myself, I'm very biased. I know thousands of brands and over the years, so I'm not the average shopper, but I've found myself looking more at the about us pages. Is it basically a headless brand, to use
yeah,
a derogatory term in e-com today, maybe with headless, but is it a headless brand or is it like a true nuts and bolts brand, whether it's family, whatever it might be? Do you see any of that playing into whether it's new customer acquisition, but just general thoughts on the brand and about us and how you feel
yeah.
or actually quantify
I think
performance
that's a
around
really
that?
good point, because we're so kind of tactical that we skirt around the edges of this stuff.
Yeah.
But what I would say there is it is clear from Search Console data that people are searching for things around a brand.
Right.
Yeah, for a D2C brand, I can guarantee pretty much if you would break out the brand terms, um, it will say, is X brand legit? Is
Yeah.
X brand a scam? You see that kind of stuff come through the data really consistently. So yeah, like there's loads of brands that we're working with at the moment where you see a Reddit thread pop up, like mentioning them, and that's directly on the SERP. So
Yeah.
people see that at that kind
Yeah.
of brand search level. So that is all part of the mix.
Yeah.
What we usually recommend is make sure that you've got really tight control over your review pages, that you've
Yeah.
got kind of supporting content that answers those questions, so you can kind of take ownership of that stuff.
Yeah. So it sounds like maybe tip number 3 is you treat Reddit like another search, where
Yep.
you're starting to, I don't know, if organically or inorganically, but building out a brand reputation inside Reddit, because Reddit is, I'd say most searches are in the top 5, it seems today.
Yeah, especially for brand searches where there's not a huge amount of
Yeah.
competition, because there's not many other places that like sources to pull from. So
Yeah.
it makes sense that it's going to get surfaced.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Sam, this was great. This was very high octane with knowledge and tips. Hopefully it was helpful for everyone. Just share a little bit more about Blink SEO and Macaroni Software and where people can find you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. In terms of Blink, we are a specialist Shopify marketing agency for large catalog stores. That's our focus. And that's because the buying journey is very particular. It's demand
Yeah.
capture versus demand generation.
Yeah.
That's essentially kind of why we break it out like that. And Macaroni is our Shopify SEO platform that we're building at the moment. And we're just launching a public version of that, which is called Macalytics, which allows you to bring Search Console data directly into Shopify. So we've just submitted to the App Store.
All right.
Fingers crossed we'll get approval and we can start pushing that out there soon.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, Sam. Like I said in the intro, please go follow Sam on LinkedIn. I know you're publishing daily, just tips, and he's doing a lot of this deep dive and research. So it's your own feed of knowledge into this ever changing world. Sam, thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.